All right, cool. So hey guys, welcome to another Girls Club. This is episode number 11, and we're here this month with the whole gang. And our next guest, Ben Balderson, and he's going to be discussing with us today Germanic Nordic history and his understandings and the of his history or of his research and the stuff he's found of pagan and animistic philosophies and practical life wisdom that he has accumulated so far. So, Ben, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and talk about your work a little bit and your interest and all that.
Yep, you bet. Yeah, my name's Benjamin Balderson, and currently the shows that I'm on are Tuesdays. I'm on a show called Deliberating Dog-Faced Dudes, which I feel kind of aligns quite a bit with what you guys are doing. And then typically I'm on a show Saturdays called Weaving Spiders Webs. That's on hiatus right now because two of the four people are getting ready to have a baby in December. So that's obviously a very important and time consuming thing. So we're on a break on that one. But if you type Benjamin Balderson into YouTube or anything, I'm basically everywhere. Uh, I've been on Crow 777, I think 14 or 15 times, something like that. And, Freeman Fly and you name it. So been all over the place. And I'm happy to be talking to you guys from Flattoberfest at that.
Yeah. What would you say are your main topics that you talk about?
Primarily, the thing I speak about the most is I'm an alchemist and I'm an actual laboratory alchemist. So when I'm speaking about it, most people speak more on exclusively what they call a spiritual alchemy, which isn't even actually alchemy. That's a misnomer. Uh, Jung was a brilliant psychologist. And some of the symbology, and this is in his own writings. This isn't me critiquing him. In his own writings, he found in some alchemy pictures things that matched his visions and dreams and his understandings of society. And so he incorporated that into his understandings, but never actually performed alchemy. So it was a very truncated understanding of it. And so while I do appreciate that the psychology that he does has some very deep meanings, he was in no way an alchemist. I'm actually a laboratory alchemist that does the work. The second most thing that I get talked about the most is I'm a heathen, practicing actual heathen, which means that I follow Odin. Uh, I live in the old ways. I actually live off grid, uh, and I wouldn't call it religious because there's no priest or anything like that. But there are specific ways that the High One reasons for those recommendations. And while there's no religious penalties for not following them, um, like one of the simple ones is the number of times Odin cautions against getting drunk, and including listing a few stories of one where he got too drunk and ended up the prisoner of a giant in a really bad situation that not would have not have come about at all had he kept his wits about him and not taking in too much alcohol. So it is not I'm gonna punish you. I'm gonna send you to hell. It's, hey man, you can do this if you want, but I gotta tell you, it's not gonna work out great. But I didn't.
Whoops, I know I was muted. I said it sounds like natural law to me, the teachings of cause and effect,
Yeah,
right?
they're all very like when I first, and this is interesting because myself and my path uh through the metaphysical and spiritual understandings. Before I ever came to Odinism, I even attended Jewish rabbinical school for a while, not because I wanted to be a Jewish rabbi, but because what did they say? And what did they teach? And I don't know. And if I don't go look at their stuff, then I'll never know. And you can, if you didn't tell me, if you didn't go, you don't really know either. And I'm that person that if I'm going to judge something, I got to go check it out for real. And so, and I've been to Native American ceremonies. I've been to Hindu ceremonies. I've been to, you name it. And for some reason, and I have some theories on this that I'm not going to air out with you guys for, it's not the proper venue, but I have some theories why this is that Northern European people tend to want to veer away from what was our natural culture. And so it was the last thing I came to. But when I finally did read the Havamal, which is basically a consolidation of Odin's words, where there's numerous stories similar to like so many other religious texts. It's actually a collection of books or stories, and it's no different in this. And so the Havamal is a consolidation of just the portions where Odin is interacting and speaking. And so that just consolidates down that specific part. And when I read that originally, which most of it comes out more in the manner of like a proverb, like I was just saying with the drinking, or one of my favorite ones is if you have a close friend, do not let the grass between your houses grow tall, because where tall grass grows, friendship dies. Simple things like that, it's like, well, I already lived like this. Like these were all things that, did I write this book? Like, so it wasn't, didn't have to go through. There was a couple things, not going to lie, mostly around the host rights and the things that you need to do as a host. And I am not and I think that's just our culture. I'm not as naturally giving. I am a generous person, but not as giving and as generous as close to required to you as anything is possibly required in our culture.
So do you identify that this study is bringing you back in time to kind of original pagan lifestyle? Is this like a historical document in some way?
Yes.
Yeah. Please share more about that history. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and this is for a lot of people, and this is where things get interesting. And this is part of why Marcus and I started Deliberating Dog-Faced Dudes, is I'm going to come off very or traditional. And so a lot of people then immediately think I'm like some Republican and all of this nonsense. And that's absolutely not the case at all. But so heathen lifestyle, for starts, you have to remember, this is, in my opinion, the kind of the opposite of civilization, and when I say civilization, I mean empire, where you have these overwhelming masses of people that all need to fit in this one uniform life. And there's very little variance in any way that they live. Where heathen lifestyles were more of a tribal thing. And so, and even inside the tribal things, they actually, the entire society surrounds itself around what they call a carl. And so a carl is actually translates into free man. And so this was the men that owned farms, is really who this was. And as a person that did own your own land, and I know that in today's woke world, they try to present these people as like landed gentries and things like that, but that was not at all the case. These people weren't overly wealthy. And in fact, if you ever take the time to listen to Tacitus's Germania, even Tacitus, when he's talking about the Germans, they don't particularly care about money at all. Okay, I don't understand it. In fact, one of the most amazing things for him was that they even preferred silver to gold. Why? Because it was easier to exchange for silver for useful things. Gold was hard, like, and they didn't want it. Is well, this is okay. I want this cool thing over here. So the money in and of itself didn't mean anything to them. So this wasn't a landed gentry situation. This was a competent person situation. And if you, as a competent, willful person, were able to maintain a piece of land. And so here's where things get real funny with me, because then people somewhat can take me as a socialist, because then the people inside my land, is because this is the way I live personally. And I have people that live on my farm, and sometimes they come and go. And everybody at the farm eats at my table. And that's a fact. I pay for every bit of it, but every bit of say on that farm is my say. And so nobody else, there's no voting. It's nothing like that, which does not mean that I don't take into account the words of the people that are living under me. For not a, if you have a bunch of unhappy people, things don't work right. And then B, sometimes your people know more about certain subjects than you do, or saw something in something that you didn't. So why wouldn't you take their opinions or their advices into account? But at the end of the day, nobody gets a vote. There's times that nobody else wants to do a thing, and I'm like, no, this is the way this is going down. And it's because, again, as I explained, they didn't really care about money. So it's not like I'm trying to live gloriously above everybody else. I'm just trying to make sure our table always is well fed, all of us, because we all eat at the same table and eat the same food. So this is, and even to the point where actually slaves that did exist in Germanic society would not be what you would consider a slave. So even Tacitus admits this, that he said slaves are the weirdest things in German society. They are basically a tenant. They have to pay the landlord a portion of what they make in order to stay on their land. And that's what slavery is. And most of them will get rid of their slaves at first chance. And so this was because it was actually kind of embarrassing to own slaves. Like, dude, you're a slave. Like, come on now, get your shit together. And so this was kind of an embarrassing thing for them in that society. They did not care for it. So while that part of it's socialist, then again, it's very traditional, where again, the man is the head of the society, and only the Carls, the Carls are the heads of each farm, and they're the only ones who get a say so in society at all. Like the Jarl, which is as close to a king is, or is just a tribal leader. All the Carls have to agree with any given plan, or else it doesn't work out. They don't have to do it. They're free men. Like, okay, your plan's good. We'll go do that. If it sucked, we're not doing that, bro. And so there was a lot of pride in being with an advantageous Jarl who had good plans, and you could be a kingsman. That was something to be proud of. And there was a lot of honor and pride in that. And including that most of these clans were all, family clans. So these were not, until the Catholics came and created incest, that was not a thing where you went out and got wives from all over. And despite modern portrayals, Vikings actually, and this is again recorded in history, rather than watching movies where Vikings are running off, grabbing women and snatching them up and taking them home, actually Vikings were super isolationist and almost refused to intermix with other people. And that's why the first descriptions of them, almost singularly, were extraordinarily tall, broad people, striking blue eyes, typically red hair, typically, big red beards, typically. And then there's also descriptions that aren't so, there are great that aren't great. Like, and this is part of what made them such great warriors: explosive, incredible strength, can do insane things in a short duration, but they aren't going to work all day. Germans don't do that. And in fact, they're they would make horrible slaves, according to Romans, because they don't do well in heat and are thirsty all the time. So
So you
that's
said you
not
went out
good
a little.
slave qualities. The guy's only going to work for about an hour, real hard. And then, yeah, it's a so the Caesar's like, these aren't great slaves. They're gonna work hard for an hour, want a bunch to drink, and they're done for the day. Like this is not great slaves. So that it was just very interesting observations about the way these people work. They weren't empire driven either. So part of what keeps you at work 40 hours a week is because you're building empire. If you just want your food and your shelter taken care of and have a family, well, that starts getting real cheap. And in fact, when you if anybody is ever interested in the off-grid lifestyle, they actually typically go about it ass backwards, where they will immediately start trying to take and save an extra large reserve of money in order to go set themselves up with this lifestyle. And really, the first thing you need to do if you are going to live off grid is start axing every need that you could possibly imagine that you can live without. Get rid of it. Be done with it. It's going to be too hard for you to maintain. It's not going to be productive in your life. And when you start living off grid, you're going to realize different things are now important to you. Like, you don't care about how pretty things are. You care, to some degree. Obviously, nobody wants to live in a trash heap, but you're not doing things like very quiche little things like trinkety things and things that are going to get broken and things that aren't going to be useful and things that aren't durable. All those little, fancy little toy things that are on at midnight on TV and you shouldn't be up ordering stuff that they're trying to hawk. None of that stuff is going to apply. Like, we make our own bread. My wife bakes our own bread, and makes sourdough. We grind our own wheat. And when you do it, you can't go and get this $250 grinder that works good for making one loaf every month if you're trying to actually live off these things. I had got to get the $1,000 cast iron grinder, and it's got to be that one because that one does double aught flour and can change. And if you want to have nice little like pastries and things like that with the fine flaky crust, you need to be able to do double aught and not just the big grainy grain. So all these things when you're starting to look at the way you're going to try and live. But I went years. It's only been about a year and a half I've even had internet, and that's because Steve Poikonen from AM Wake Up and Slow News Days and Union of the Unwanted, he moved in with me for a while, and he puts in so much work and effort into podcasting and doing shows that's his living. And so he had to have internet, and I didn't have internet. I don't have TV. You go outside and find other things to do. Animals are very entertaining, and all these things quit mattering. And at that point, when I go into the city, I get kind of sick. Like I've been ill for like 4 days, and that's just from me being in the city. Everything buzzes. At night, I can hear literally every sound on my farm. In the city, the whole city buzzes. If I go into somebody's house, it still sounds like a beehive in their house. All the electronics in the house make a buzz, and you don't notice it because you've never been out of it. But when you've not been in it, you're like, why does your house sound so loud? That's really weird, man. And so all these things that you live without, that you can, and you don't even know it, you start learning to live without, and that's how you live off grid. When I first moved off grid, I pulled up with a Winnebago. I used to drive down to the river and fill a 55-gallon barrel up and drive that up top, and we'd run that through a little recycling heater until the 55-gallon barrel was warm, and then switch it from going into the little heater into going over and overhead, and that was the shower, and that's what you did dishes with and whatever. And life was fantastic. And was it rough? Yes. But every time you upgrade, the appreciation that you have for it, as opposed to this, you need to move into a pre-made, pre-done, this farm that you don't need to put any work into. The appreciation that you have for is 100-fold greater. And here's the other problem. That person that moves onto that farm doesn't know how to do any of the work. And so when they move on there, and I promise you, if there's one thing on a farm I can guarantee, it's going to break. What is it? I don't know. It's going to break. Something today, something tomorrow, something later today, it's going to break. And so if you did not build it, you did not put it together, you think you can just move into it like a Barbie house and just start living this off-grid lifestyle, which no plumbers coming out to fix my plumbing. No electricians come, because I do have a generator and I have electrical and I have a solar. Nobody's coming out to fix that. Nobody's coming out to do my roof. None of it. If it happens on my farm, I have to fix it. I have to know how it works. So if it's something somebody else made for me, that's much harder for me to try and fix and go backtrack the thing. And the thing Odin says, and this is what all of this is Odin's biggest first message to you. And that is, it is better to live on your own land, even if you live in a shack with nothing but a couple of goats, than to be a slave in somebody else's system. So if you don't have it made yet, fine. Better to be that dude than a slave living rich here. And so that's what I did. And now my life is much easier, much nicer. We have full-time running water that's gravity fed and into a nice water tank. And we're transitioning. We've been on propane, but we're transitioning over to biogas, where your toilet runs your poop from your toilet goes into a container, and then that gets pressurized and that feeds into your natural gas fittings. And you can, depending on the size of the bag, you can do 4 to 6 people for a water heater and a stove per day. And if you need more, I have a farm with pigs and cows, which is extremely methane heavy. And so you're just running off methane, which is actually, despite what they are trying to present in the media, an extraordinarily clean gas. And I say this as a chemist and an alchemist. I'm actually a very well-known in California organic chemist. And so when you look at the hydrocarbon gases, the two things that are involved are hydrogen and carbon. And so now the question is, how many carbons and how many hydrogens? And methane, you're talking about, is methane two carbons, as opposed to a lot of other gases where you're talking about a whole lot more carbon, which I don't believe. Obviously, I'm not with the whole carbon nonsense story. That's just insanity at its finest. But when you're just looking at the cleanliness of a gas, it is actually an extraordinarily clean gas. So to be able to just produce that on my own farm, now again, I'm not relying on, once that's in place, I'm not relying on the system at all. The more free I can be from the system, the more free I can be. But to try to live like a city person, impossible. So again, cut down your lifestyle, look at how roughing it would be, and then to do it successfully for a very long time. And so then you start doing things like your gardening. And like right now, we put in our tomatoes and it's a calculation. And so I eat about 4 jars of tomato sauce of some form, big mason jars a week, whether it's spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, tomato paste, blah, blah, blah. So if I'm eating 4 a week, at times 52 weeks a year, that means I need about a little over 200 jars of tomatoes. So it takes this in to make one of those jars takes about 2 pounds of tomatoes. By the time all the, it's boiled down and everything's removed out, takes a couple pounds of tomatoes. So now I'm going to have to, in order to fill that quota, and start growing enough tomatoes per this. And that's going to apply for all my different foods. And then we don't start. And again, while I'm not going to say the words of the things that happened in 2020, we all saw the supply chain problems that derived because of it. And so if you want to not suffer that again, and we all see it coming, we all do. We've all seen what's going on in the stores and the way things are all of a sudden getting like that again. And yeah, I realize there's been a recent, because of the election, drop in the fuel prices, but it's like any of us believe that's going to last in any way. Like we don't know that November's coming, and this is just a quick shot for that. Um, so if you don't want your food eating daily and eating nice food taken away, stock your own and grow your own. It starts again. This is Odin's words. Don't be a slave to that dude. Now, instead of them deciding when I get to eat, I decide when I get to eat. And that's just a personal, absolute responsibility. And so one of the other giant variances in this is that I haven't brought in, and with the ladies here, is then the relationship part. And so this is, again, going to be very traditional, because in my house, the man is the absolute head. It is an absolute patriarchy. But in saying that, my wife is the heart of my home and the heart of my farm. And so in heathen society, and this was very odd, especially during the time period, women had full rights. And which didn't mean that, not the Wicca nonsense where they're shield maidens and blah, blah, blah. No. In fact, just the term shield implies defense. That's your defense. That's not a sword maiden. It's a shield. She's staying home. She is taking care of the property. She is your best interest, and your best interest is taking care of the entire farm. And so this was where that came in. But in that, if you mistreated your wife, if you didn't make her happy, she had full right to divorce you. She had full right to leave. Also, specifically, it was a very monogamous society. And that's, again, a thing that's misportrayed, where it's these people were out raping and pillaging and having sex with whoever. No, in the actual histories, if you read them, highly monogamous, and once again, would not interbreed with other people. Like, I have a wife at home, keep to yourself. That's just a fact. I don't disrespect my wife. That is insanity at its finest. She is the one who is going to take my children when they're small and instill them with my values and make them strong and healthy, and make our future together something that's real, while I'm out taking care of her and I and that. And so for me to not have that as somebody that's perfectly aligned on my team would be stupidity at its finest. This is, I think, again, where I bring back in the Catholic Church when they started forcing the intermixing between people. Well, now instead of having somebody that has my beliefs and is going to, while, again, the incest subject is touchy, which is not scientific at all. I do organic biology all the time. It's insanity. It's just some stuff which doesn't mean that I think sisters and brothers and things like that. But typically your cousins, second, third cousins in any village, before modern travel, any person in any village was going to be your second or third cousin. But the thing is then when you two intermarried, they both were going to have a vested interest in the upraising of the family, the upraising of the village. They're going to share values and traits. And so when you start bringing in, getting this wives from other places, like they tried to portray it as, which was actually a Roman culture, because the Romans subsumed all the other cultures, where heathens isolated. Now you have somebody raising your children without your values. And this is where you have a system that starts degrading very quickly, because if two things, if you don't have a vested interest in the future because your children are something that is important, then you become very hedonist. And we all see hedonism. That's 90% of people today. I'm living for to the moment. YOLO. You only live once. I'm going to burn it all right now to the ground because I'm going to be dead, and who cares? Like, that is not a lasting future. And then if your children are not instilled with your values, the future you're going to have is going to be torn and horrible, because you're going to have values, again, as we're seeing today, where our values were not carried on, and the values that have taken over are very conflicting. And so you see especially in the Northern European people, even the ones that live in America, an extreme issue where so many of them have been pushed into the Abrahamic pantheons. But you can see, like, it's funny because you can say you're almost anything else, and all the Christians will growl about it, and you're a demon. And they still, some of them, I admit, absolutely still do that to me. But you can watch as soon as I say no, I follow Odin. You can see all of a sudden a bunch of guys will sit up a little bit straighter and just like, and you just see it like there's a yearning for that responsible, where you get to go prove yourself and you get to be your own man and be somebody and honor your ancestors and honor your children, and family becomes everything. That life is something that we miss and that we need, and it's in them and they want it, and it is something that's been torn away. And I do have a hard time because some of the more Orthodox Christians, they are more for the nuclear family type thing. And then with that, more traditional. So I have a hard time with some of those guys because they're producing a similar lifestyle to what I would promote. So when I say hard time, I'm not as tactful to that group as a lot of your heathens or pagans would be, because when, while I don't agree with their particular religion, and I think that the Christianity in and of itself only breeds weakness, because you're asking immediately, you were never a good person. You have no ability to be a good person. It's only through having somebody else let you in the back door. Hey, I'm with this dude. Cool. You can come in the party. But you're never cool. You're not really. You just only in here because this guy said so. And that's such a self-defeating. I couldn't even imagine waking up every day and going, yeah, I'm just a piece of crap. But thank God there's a dude that says I'm not. One dude says I'm not, so it's cool. Like I can't possibly imagine how you would think that a society with that mentality is going to be a self-responsible society. I don't know, but the Orthodox do seem to manage it to some degree, so I can't complain when I see the fruits of what they're saying. So I do have a hard time with them because, like I said, I would normally like to be very oppositional, and some of that I can't be oppositional because, again, they're the more traditional, and I do agree with that. But I also would state that was a subsuming of the Germanic lifestyle, because if you look at the Abrahamic world moved through Rome and through Greece and then into the northern European worlds. And in the north, if you look at the way things were in Rome and in Greece, they didn't act like us. And then it's only through the subsuming Alexander the Great style will kind of merge with your religious beliefs and let you keep your holidays as long as you pay taxes to us and follow our governors. So that's where this move of, you see so many and celebrations mixed into the Christian lifestyle, that if you took all those out and went strictly with the original, where it moved into Greece and Rome, it would not, those two things would be completely, different. I think that the thing that we see today is already the Germanic influence on the Abrahamic pantheon in order to make it acceptable for Northern Europe.
Wow. Okay. Let's pause for a moment and just see if our ladies have some questions so far.
Absolutely.
Well, I actually wanted to respond on the part about kind of some of the Germanic values. I actually come from like a very Germanic family. Even the cemetery that my family is laid at is called and named Valhalla.
Nice.
But seriously, and it's very fascinating because now my great grandpa, and I'm not sure about his father, he was a Freemason, but my grandmother, she definitely ended up going Christian. But it's been interesting because as I've reconnected with my ancestry, like distant and then more immediate, I find like hard work is a value that has been passed down from generation to generation. Just hard work, consistency. And I've just seen so many, even like smoking meat, like that's just a tradition that's been passed down from father to son and so on in my family, and family, strong family values. And it's just very interesting because even though like some of my family, they were raised Christian, like for the last 85 years or so, um, they still have those very strong values that almost seem to, I don't know if it's epigenetic or in the DNA, but it's just been really interesting to see how those older values and practices are still present, even without our family having a connection to, I guess, the more ancient past before Christianity.
Exactly. And actually, weaving spiders, uh, one of our last episodes, it was just myself and Alan Marcus, and we had a gentleman named Christopher McIntosh, who is an occult mass. He's hung out with Freya Aswin, and he's hung out with every old name that you can imagine that everybody talks about. He's one of them. And we had talked about that, the Germanic yearning. And I believe that part of the problem that ends up is this lifestyle carried through. But I think where we end up with a yearning and a need on a more religious level is because we don't have our trees. And that's something they took away. And it was one of the very specific practices. You can look at Charlemagne. Charlemagne went and slaughtered whole legions of Danes, just went in and started piecemeal slaughtering people that didn't follow Christianity, and then cut down Irminsul, which was Odin's tree. I believe it's Saint Boniface that cut down Donar's tree. And that's actually, I talked about this with Christopher, is still celebrated by the church. They have a monument to we cut down Thor's tree. You know, that's Donar in Germanic, that's the Thor god. We cut down that tree, and they got a church right there, and they have a plaque right there, and this is where our saint, you know, came here and wiped you heathens out and cut down your sacred things. And while they forced it on us, and I think that World War II, I think a lot of the propaganda that was post World War II, I think a lot of World War II was transitioning in order to create the heavy white guilt, and then the disconnect to their actual culture where they're almost scared to touch it.
Actually, it's funny you say that. My family, the only German word to be passed down in my family is Gesundheit, which is essentially like saying health or bless you.
Yeah.
And they stopped speaking it after the war because they were ashamed of being German and feeling associated with Hitler and stuff, because they were never slave keepers. Even like you said, slaves were weird over there. It was more of like an indentured servant than it was. And you know, even like the head son, like he would be sleeping on the floor with the indentured servant. Everybody starts from the ground and they kind of work their way up. And it's
Exactly.
what you do with your time, and it's what you do with the opportunity of life, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, they didn't even want you to be indentured. They like paid the debt off, bro. Quit being a slave. It's embarrassing for both of us. Like they didn't, and actually, and this is written in the histories and documented that the slaves did not do all the housework. The slaves didn't go run around doing all your work for you. You still did your own work. They gave you a portion like a rental, but they're living on your property. Why would you be able to live for free on my property and take from my resources and not provide back to the table you're eating out of? That's insanity. So it's not even a bad system, and it wouldn't fit under what in our Western language would say call a slave in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
What are some of the other like social lessons or guidelines, you know, that come from the heathen tradition?
So if you ever go to read the Havamal, and so again, understand, like one of the first things that Tacitus said was, these people don't live by each other. They don't make cities. They don't have a family. They don't have a I'm not sure that they even like each other, like, because we would live so isolated away from each other. But in that situation, because of that, there's extreme host rights, where if somebody shows up at my doorstep, and it doesn't matter what color, what country, what sex, if you show up at my doorstep, I am as close to obligated by law to feed you and put you by a fire if it's cold and give you something to drink as there is in that culture at all. There's a specific story actually where Odin is having an argument with another goddess, and Odin is throwing all kinds of slurs about her son. And your son's lazy and he's ugly and he stinks and he's worthless and he's got no honor. And she looked at Odin and said, and it wasn't his son specific directly, but like a son heir later on down the road, right? He's a god, so he's not died in one generation. This is many generations down. Like your son is a bad host, and that stopped the argument right there. Odin immediately left, went to this, descendant's house, and then hid himself as the traveler and got led into the house. Well, the first person he meets is the second son, and the second son is a good son, and he takes Odin and his horse in, and he's like, "Don't worry about it. I got this horse taken care of for you, sir. Make yourself comfortable." And Odin says, "No, I'm going up to the castle. I'm going to go up there." And he goes, "You don't want to go up there. They aren't real nice up there." It's like, no, that is where I'm going to go, though. So Odin goes up there, and he disguised. And when he gets there, they were very nasty to him and rude, and things devolve to the point where they tie him up to a post and start torturing him physically. And then eventually, when he doesn't die, they light him on fire. And Odin lets himself be tortured for 3 days. And during that 3 days, he watches every person that misbehaved to this guest that showed up at their door. And every person, when he left of that crew, was dead. The second son now ran the entire thing. So while it's not a law, mistreat your guests. One of them might be Odin. See how it pans out for you.
There's a similar story and lesson in Vedic. I think in one of the Vedic texts, it's you don't never know who's knocking at your door, and it might be God in disguise, Krishna or something.
Yep, exactly. So the host writes, even to the point where also, if when you're at my house, you highly admire something, you can have it. And this weirds people out a little bit, because people are over generosity is at this in our culture is such a narcissistic trait where you're overly generous, and then you've got some type of ownership over this person and they're indebted to you. And so a lot of people immediately will have a little bit of a weird reaction if you're like, well, then have it, and but on the same token, in our culture, if you have something I wanted that I like, you need to give that to me too. So it's a very symbiotic. Or if I put you up for a few days, you probably need to go out and chop up a cord of wood or two and help me put away some wood for the winter. Something along that effect, where you're not just the leech of a person. Because while there is a host rights, there's also guest rules. And as a guest, and some of the guest rules even include things like nobody likes somebody that knows everything in their house. When you're in somebody's house, you let them lead the conversation. You let them shine. It's not you're not the king here. Let the king shine. Don't overshine the king. That's not a good plan. Things like that. Don't overstay your welcomes. Don't take too much and not give back. So it sounds, and again, which in this society it's not, but to a normal person, you're like, well, these are all kind of very common sense things. This is just how you live as a decent person. What are you even talking about? How is this even almost a religion? Like, what are we talking about here? But ends up what it is just being a damn decent person and understanding that other people need to live. Other people are going to make mistakes. Other people need to have their own freedoms. But again, there is also a class that it's a class system, and a lot of people aren't going to understand that. So again, where we've talked about the Jarl and the Carl, the people who live on the Carl's farm are thralls. And so the thrall isn't really as a free man. He could go live on another farm. But if you're going and living on a farm, are you a free on somebody else's farm? Are you a free man? No, you're now his dude. You're following his rules. You're his responsibility. You're going to have to pay tribute to him because you're his responsibility. You're not a free man. Only thing we recognize as a free man is an independent man. So that whole word free, and this is where I have a problem with a lot of communities where they want to go on and bang on about being free. No, free isn't the thing. You don't get freedom without independence. If you cannot be self-sufficient, self-independent, there is no such thing as freedom for you. You are at somebody else's mercy. And that means you get to, and the further you get in that system, and they do make it comfy to start. They sold a nice package, hey, we'll pay all your basic bills and your basic needs and your medicals, and you can have cables and everything else. And now we're starting to see the decline of that, and the decline of the money that was going to even be available. And pretty soon everybody's going to still have that equal amount in that system, but there's going to be a whole lot less of that amount to be shared around. And that's going to be a real problem. And so you don't even get a choice on whether you get to not be in part of that bad decision because you threw down your chips with that. You're going to eat whatever you get. I'm not.
So could someone exit a farm and attempt to create their own independence, like change class? So
100%.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. This wasn't a family-based or, again, a financial-based system. This was a competent-based system. So if there wasn't somebody running this land, you wanted to go off and do your thing and you had enough gumption to do it, it's not easy. I would highly recommend. There's a movie that's recently come out, and it's about, I believe, 1600s Danish life. It's called The Promised Land, and it's this guy that just goes out and he goes and lives in this area nobody else is living in and starts farming it, and that's going to expand that. He's doing it in the king's name. I'm not saying do it in the king's name, but the idea is the king wasn't really helping him, and until he started succeeding, the king didn't help at all. It's only when he started going out, proving it can be done, proving I'm my own man, I can take care of land. Look, I can even take care of land and send you some bags of food. And the king's like, they said food? They have extra? Well, and now the king's now suddenly interested in investing into that land, and now this guy has a title. And they immediately give him a title and give him people underneath that are working. But before you ever get to that point, you need to prove yourself as not only and this is the thing as a husband, and this is part of where so many men are going wrong, and young men, is your first step. And as a man, when you decide to become a man, is to become independent. And this is part of why in heathen villages, they would kick the boys out. And if you can go live for a year out by yourself, there's a couple things that have happened. You come back and you're no longer a net negative to the village. You have become a man. You do not require things from the village. You can live all on your own. You are providing for yourself. Now you're a net positive for the village. We want you on our team. And so you are a man. You're on our team, bro. But then also with that, now that I'm an independent man that can take care of myself, maybe I don't like that village. Maybe I don't like the way you guys are living. I don't want to be part of your team. I've now been away from your team for a while, and I'm doing pretty good. I don't really need to be part of that. And so if you did join back in with these tribes, there was the tribe was gaining a benefit and you were gaining a benefit because this was tribe was living in a way you wanted. And so you want to be part of this system. You want to be a beneficial, honorable person. And so then now that I've been providing for myself, if I can provide extra, now I can look at taking on a wife because I can feed me and somebody else. And so many of these young people today, and I know it sounds so wonderful, and we built it together. Well, don't expect her to treat you like the man then either, bro, because you built it together. She's just as much the man as you. And so don't expect her to give you that place that you didn't earn. You'll never get it. You didn't earn it. And I don't know what to tell you about that. It sounds harsh, but it's just the way it is. And so if now at this point, though, I've become responsible and proven myself enough, competent and responsible enough to provide for not just a wife, but we're obviously going to have children. And now I can have other people living on my land. And now my land is producing much more. And all these people are living good. And it was a highly honorable thing to be in that system. And so these thralls, they were not even people that were because our language today puts a negative connotation on the word. But it was a highly honorable thing to live under a good Carl and under a good Jarl. Like we're successful. We eat what we want. We do what we live good. How are you living? And, so this was not the system that we're given today. Like even at the independence of our country, where they tried to make it out to be, oh, these were landed gentry. Well, then how is it that indentured servants worked their way into having their own land? Which happened a lot. In fact, people would sell themselves into indentured servitude in order to come here and earn that position. So all you had to do then when you decided to have your own land, who were you buying it from? The nobody? Nobody owned it. You said, that piece over there, that's mine. I'm going to put some posts up. Inside those posts, that's mine. And I'm man enough to take care of it. And this is where traditionally in the United States anyways, we have always been very heavy on homesteading laws. And even today, the homesteading laws have a lot more power and quirk to them than what people want to understand. Because if you're living on a land and you're working that land, that's your land.
All right. Any comments or questions, ladies?
No, I was just listening and I'm enjoying the history aspects of it, because it's usually my favorite parts of it. But I would just like to add, like, the history I've read about that kind of stuff and the backgrounds of like all these different cultures, whatever the culture may be, and whatever society that people agreed to live within. It always really depended on like whether or not you had like a good community leader or a bad one. Always depends on the individuals. Still at the end of the day, So I think with the way drama works with TV and movies, of course, they're always going to paint a dramatic and dark and negative light on many things, because it's far more interesting because you're like, yeah, now what's he gonna do, and it's just like what modern people love about TV is all that kind of stuff. But really, history, if you want to know anything about it for real, you have to do reading, like going to the library and researching and stuff, like, and like you brought up Christianity and some of the problems with Christianity, which, well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's Christianity on a large that's the issue. It's really, I would feel the Catholic Church is the issue on the large scale. Because like with research that I've done with even that culture, is that I have found that there is a big difference between ancient Christianity, which follows more like natural law principles, morality, ethics, and more traditional values, where then you have modern Christianity, which is anything after the Emperor Constantine, when they brought in, they developed Catholicism as a large institution, and it became a completely different thing,
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I couldn't agree more. By the way, this is part of why I made that caveat of having a harder time with the Orthodox community, because like you're saying, the Catholics, they're woo. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying.
yeah. So like, it's funny when, we do end up talking about stuff like Christianity and other religions, like me personally, I don't care what belief or religion people want to be a part of, because I know that the individual is not necessarily, how they live their life is not necessarily like based on whatever doctrine. So I'm pretty open in that way. Like everybody will probably tell you I'm like that. Like I work a lot with the community on a larger scale, and they're of all walks of life. And what I found is, as long as they live morally, ethically, they use care, they treat each other with common courtesy, they behave in a way where we don't allow violations to take place and we don't violate other people's rights. These are, I think the things that can really unite us as a human race, instead of letting all the nitpicky little details divide us into all these little factions where now we're like name calling and just being generally discourteous towards each other for the sake of whatever, impulse or emotional trigger we want to have. So, I always think it's encouraging that when different people who have this difference or that difference, and everybody can come together and be like, well, we all agree on this one thing, and that's usually the most important aspect.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. That's why, like, when I say that the more traditional, the Orthodox Christians, the people that they produce, I tend to align with much more than so many other people, including what most people would even call pagans or pagans, like the Ostru community and things like that. Like some of the things that they're doing, like where they're doing the Wiccan and the polytheistic, or not the polytheist, the polyamory and things like that. And it's like, you guys are you're not actually trying to be heathens. You're just doing the weird new agey thing. And that's fine too, but it's not what I do at all. So I actually align more with the value systems of the Orthodox Christians, which is a real hard thing to say in a lot of times, but it just is how it pans out. It's the fruit of the tree, that's the way it works.
I have a question about how the ancient societies perceived the gods. Were they expressions like in part of natural phenomenon? That seems part of it. And then also like, it personification of right and wrong, and then were they treated as actual people in a sense, or what makes a god,
So in the heathen pantheons, like for starts, I'm an Odinist, and that's part of why I somewhat clarify this. And in today's comic book understandings of that, people think that that's kind of an obvious thing, but it's actually not an obvious thing at all. While he was king of the gods, there's a lot that comes with that. And a lot of people did not identify with Odin or the way Odin sees things. So when you're looking at the pantheon in of itself, actually the Asir gods themselves were more popular. Depending on what class you were from, the upper class people tended to follow Tyr more, and Tyr was what I would, if it's more of a sky father figure type being. Now, we could do a whole show on the contentions that I have with some of the positions that have been assigned to a lot of these different gods. In fact, I actually was even having that argument earlier today about Freya. where they put down Freya as a god of love and fertility. And I said, where in the stories does she represent love and fertility? Tell me that story, please. Because while I will say that she represents greed and lust and beauty and, some things like that.
War.
And I even wouldn't even call her war, because in no situation does she actually go to war. She's really just kind of this pretty piece that doesn't do anything throughout any of the stories. And the story that she does the most in is, well, the story she's in the most is the one where she leaves her husband to go to these dwarves, and these dwarves want to do vaguely sexual things with her in order to give her information on how to get this Brissengamer necklace. And which she does all these things and then comes back with the pretty necklace, which the infidelity, the greed, the lust, those are all represented. And never comes back. And she actually spends substantial amounts of time trying to find him, but he's like, nah, I'm out. And so in no way do I see in the stories, and actually her two daughters, when translated, can translate into lust and greed. And so where these other connotations got put onto her, I'm like, and so again, this happened with Odin in many ways. So Tyr was typically your upper class followed Tyr more often. And he a lot of times is called a war god. And I can see why he would be called a war god. I can see why Freyr is called a war god in Thor, obviously. Have a good one, Greg. And why Thor is. But Thor then was followed by the lower classes. And in fact, there's a very famous story where Odin changes himself into a bridgeman named Harbard and has an argument at the bridge, and Thor is trying to cross this ferry, not bridge, and Odin wouldn't come over and get him. And so Odin starts talking crap. And when he talks crap, he's talking about the farmers and the lesser people. And Thor, immediately gets mad because that's his people. And it was also reciprocated. So he was the protector of the realm. He was going to make sure everything was okay for everybody. He's stability. Where on the opposite side, Loki is, we don't have a good evil, as Leslie was asking, where we have things that happen from chaos and things that happen from stability. And if you're always in stability, then things die, because that's what winter is, where nothing moves, nothing changes. If you're always in chaos, that's fire. Everything burns up. You got to kind of be in this little middle ground, where you're kind of back and forth between a little bit of both. But as far as gods went, so there was no evil, but the under people loved Thor, or Donar. And then the middle class more typically followed Tyr. You had some mixing where then the Vanir come in. So the Vanir at one point in time was a separate pantheon, and this was before Odin became king of the gods. So there are clans that followed Frey and Freya, which were Vanir, before the Great War brought them together. And when Odin, that's where Odin became king. And so people followed those, and them are typically more wildish people. They are not, for a heathen, they are less civilized than most heathens. And then being an Odinist was typically for more of the priest class, the magic workers, things like that. Any questions? But Yeah. And then the gods were not seen and worshiped the way they are today. So here's another few fun facts that are historical. You can go through all the different religious texts, all the different writings. There's no sacrifice of any human ever asked for or animal. There's one partial poem that talks about the sacrifice of a horse. And you're not even sure exactly what's going on in the poem because the poem's very weird and very disjointed and missing large chunks where you can't quite get a grasp on what's going on there. But there is inference where you could possibly say there's a horse. So if you imagine tribal life instead, you can imagine that, again, they didn't have refrigeration back then, obviously. And so when they would get together, well, throughout the week, you obviously, if I slaughter a goat or a calf or something like that, I can't eat all that meat and I can't store it. I can jerk some of it, sure, and smoke some of it. But what you're going to do is then go, this week, I'm the one who brings the food, the cow to the feast. You bring this to the feast, blah, blah, blah. Well, then at the end of that, and this is where I have a bone to pick with archaeologists, little pun with that one, because every time they find a pit of bones, they're like, oh, this was sacrifices to their god, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe they didn't leave trash all over the place, and that's a trash pit for the feast days. And so when you got done with your trash, you just threw it in the trash pit. And that's just how that works. Real reasonable, right? But they, as was already stated, the reasonable is not as exciting for the entertainment industry. So those real reasonable things don't get said. But there's no sacrifice. The gods are not prayed to in the way and form that is current today, the way people understand it today. So with the entire pantheons of gods, you were able to align yourself with somebody that more naturally was the things that you were interested in. Not everybody wants to be a warrior. Not everybody wants to be a farmer. Not everybody wants to, and that's fine. And so you're going to align yourself with the beings that more suit your lifestyle. And they were treated as living beings. So again, with that story of Harbard, and this is very interesting. So when you look at historians, the entirety of the reason that they call Odin a philanderer, where he goes out and cheats on his wife, outside of he did sleep with a giantess one time in Earth, however that works, right? But where they talk about him sleeping with human women, the entirety of that story comes from from the Lay of Harbard, which is a fleeting. And a fleeting was basically a rap battle before rap battles were ever even imagined, or rap or any of those things, where it was basically a crap talk poem. And so in this, Odin, when he's talking to Thor, and if you've ever been a man on a construction site, this is how dudes act. So Odin's like, well, what were you doing when this was going on? And Thor's like, well, I went and fought the frost giants and I defeated them all and I killed this entire clan and I kept Asgard safe. What were you doing, old man? And Odin looks at him, he's like, I was banging your mom. And this is how the conversation, and Odin keeps making more lurid and shitty claims, and Thor keeps getting more angry and presenting more honorable and glorious deeds to counter it, upon which Odin is just crap talking back to the point where Thor gets so extraordinarily angry he can't even handle himself, but he can't get across this river for some reason, and Odin needs the ferryman, and he's so mad he can't handle it, and Odin's like, yeah, good luck, it's a 3-day walk that way. And so he's got him so frothing mad. And as a man, we've all had meathead friends, and this is the representation of Thor. He's the big, I hit it with the hammer, I do it right. And this is we've all had that friend, and you kind of make fun of their intelligence, and you poke fun at them, and you do little games like he did to Thor there. But in the scholarly world, they don't understand that inner dynamic between very masculine men. That
Just
men,
general dude trash talking. I imagine that's always been the case. And like, I just think it's funny when like politicians even do it. And you're like, dude, that's how dudes have talked for as long as I've existed. I mean, they all talk like that. Who are you
exactly,
kidding?
exactly,
But think it's funny that people should go back and look if they're going to go and look into this topic that they should understand because I've read the mythology behind Odin, I've read the mythology behind Zeus, I've read the mythology behind the Irish and Britannia and the Scottish. I read all
Mm.
of that stuff. Like I was very interested in that as a kid. And when I went and looked back through them as an adult, you'll find that they're pretty much the same tenets, whether it's Hindu, Dutch, or Viking, or Germanic, or and
yeah,
Irish. A lot of these mythologies that go back so far, they do come from generally they're a lot of the same stories, which like I have my own theories as to why, but just to keep that in mind when you're researching this stuff, like
yeah,
have a broad view and like look at it all because all these stories are kind of the same. So in
yeah.
a lot of ways, and it's just the little details that are changed because of cultural perception or whatever. There's a lot of stuff like that in history. Like,
Environment. A lot of times, I think, like the Abrahamic, you got desert compared to the Germanic, which is very mountainous. You're not gonna same rules
yeah,
aren't gonna apply. Yeah,
yeah. So it's those kind of differences. Like I think it's the what is it? Is it maybe the Hindu? It might be Hindu, but I can't remember, so don't quote me on it. But the way they write about the beginning of existence, when God created everything, is a lot different in the way that like the Bible describes it. And like it all kind of sounds like the same process to me. To me, it sounds like people who don't understand science are describing terraforming on
right.
a new planet. That's what it sounds like to me when I read a lot of that particular story across the board of all these different cultures when you pull out through mythology and try to research a lot of like history with mythology and find
Mm.
out what was actually what. So I just think that I just wanted to add that in because I think that's really interesting for people to keep in mind.
I don't disagree at all. It most cultures being a decent person is pretty much what they're getting at. Be a decent person, like, and most of us have a fair grip on what that's going to be. I mean, while I'm not in the natural law community and things like that, most of their tenants you can understand. Nobody likes it when you steal from them. Nobody likes it when you go hurt other people. Like we all get that. We all get it. And so that's where most of those cultures, and it's funny that even with that, we still have to have the understanding that there are a lot of people that just don't get it. That's why this had to be written down in practice. Like, some of you're just, you don't seem to get it. We don't like living with you that much. Hey, here's some rules, bro. You don't seem to get it. But yeah,
Right.
they're all be a decent person. And like you said, outside of variances, which I would, say again, would, from my perspective, a lot of that has to do with uh, regional living styles, because that's always incorporated into your religion, the different things that are going to be important to living in that region. And if you're living in an arid region, or if you're living out in the plains, the Sioux Indians, or the Lakotas, they're going to have different rules than people living up in the mountains, and different cultural practices, because they need to do different things. But then when you boil down to the philosophical part of it, it's all going to be a decent person. and and we've all been watching the same world in general or system at play for however long our people have been. And so we've all been watching that same thing. So yeah, we're all going to kind of eventually come to pretty similar conclusions, one would assume. We're all seeing the sun every day and the moon, and living the same life, unless you're like in Puerto Rico and you don't have one season and you just live and everybody has food all the time and you don't have to do anything. I've
You
heard Puerto
mentioned the
Rico.
tree, Ben, the tree, how important the tree was. Can you expand on why and the myth, the tree of life symbology and all that?
Absolutely. And that's one of my very favorite subjects, because that was when I first truly got into Odinism. That was, and where it was really sinking into me. That was when Odin came, and I've only had one interaction with Odin, and the tree was what he showed me. And he didn't say a lot either. It wasn't this grand visions and exchanges and things like that. Three tree of lives, because the heathen tree of life is different than the Kabbalistic tree of life. And but the heathen tree of life normally displayed is not complete either. And so when I had the vision, actually three trees were floating in front of me, and Odin said to me, "I'm three minds, not one." And that was what I got out of it. And then the only other thing he said to me is when I opened my eyes, there was a giant spider web, like intricate inches, like an inch from my face. And there was a spider on it, like pulsing. And I could see it as it was pulsing. I could see the whole web move with it. And that the spider was like controlling this whole thing and receiving all the information from it. And he said, "You are the spider." And then that was the end of it. And so the main thing in their culture is going to be the Yggdrasil tree, which is the tree of life. And the tree of life, in my opinion, breaks. And this is something where there's going to be contention between me and what a lot of your current, if you read about these symbologies and things, is broken then into two things. One of them is going to be Irminsul. This is Odin's tree, which you can see this is the top end. If you count, this is the trunk, and then this is the fruit end. And then the hammer, which is Thor, which is literally basically this symbol upside down almost. And so the center part would be the trunk, and then the root is Thor, and the top is Loki in the trunk. And so that would be a complete Yggdrasil. But then also it needs to be locked into place by a carbon body, which is why the third mind's there. Which the Trinity in and of itself is that's a heathen thing. That is not a Christian thing. And there's actually a ton of contention because nowhere in Christian works do they mention a Trinity. But specifically, Trinity is all about our particular culture. Odin started out as Odin Villian and then when Odin collapses that down and becomes the All-Father, then it's Odin, then it's Loki, Odin, Thor, and so there's always that Trinity, and inside that Trinity is one thing. The Trinity is one and three, and that's something that has absolutely been borrowed from our culture and pushed over into theirs, and a lot of their like I said, there's a lot of infighting in between different Christian factions because there's no actual Trinity history for them. So and then also anytime that they say pagan, they mean Roman pagan. So there's no credentials for heathen society brought into these talks. And so the fact that they stole the Trinity directly from it doesn't get actually recognized because they're matching themselves up against Roman pagan, and Roman pagan was super weird, nothing to do with anything from the Celtic or the Britannia, the Anglo-Saxon, none of that. They were their own super. Anytime on Facebook when they're like, "Oh, pagans used to do this practice," if you turn around and actually look it up, it's always Romans. Always Romans. The heathens did not do weird crap like that. Most of the practices that again, I still practice most of them today. The only one that I've ever found extraordinarily weird, and this is in, if you ever watched the movie 13th Warrior, um, uh, that is based off of an actual historical accounting, where there's a Arab that mixed with heathens for a while. And according to his accounting, because he was supposedly he could write, and heathens did not typically write, which I don't know if that's even true at all. In that, if that wasn't something that just that one group maybe didn't write. And I know it wasn't true because they tried for years. And I think based off of this accounting saying we didn't have a language and didn't have a written language. And since then, we all know about the rune stones that are consistently being found with entire, like one of them just recently that was found. The story on it wasn't even like an exciting story. It was, this storm happens this many years in a cycle. Don't, beware of that. Like, good information. They carved it in stone, said, you know what, we should remember this. And so they had a written language. So I think maybe based off of the accounting just specifically of something bin Falan, Allah bin Falan, because of his accounting, they would try and claim we didn't have a language, a written language. And then because we didn't leave a bunch of scroll work all over, were sacred to us. Man and woman were originally made from trees. So Odin, Vili, and Ve, and this is again where the Trinity comes in. They went to the ocean and found 2 saltwater soaked logs that were bloated with salt water. So this is very specific because when you look at your body is all kinds of salts running it and all the water. This is what the pieces of you. Then he made the first man and woman out of an ash tree and an elm tree, ash and embla. And then Odin gives them, or we'll start out with Odin gives them their high mind, and so that's their thought, their higher thought, their ability to remember things. Odin is the god of knowledge and wisdom. And in the stories, that's representative. Then his brother Ve gives the name. So Ve is your ego. And that's what other people need to call you because you don't really need to know your name. That's what other people need to know. And you kind of do because that's what they're going to say. But if it's just you, you don't need that. This is an egoic thing. And then Vili, which we would pronounce vile, which is where I would land with the most where the religions that I do have a giant deviation from, most of them, it's because they are a duality religion where they have picked a light side, or, they will talk about descending and things like that. As an alchemist, the sulfur and the oil, the sulfur and the salt are the same thing. Anytime you have two things, like this is something that the Kabbalion was always supposed to teach you. You had 2 things, and then you separate into a polarity. This is a polarity. And then when you rectify the polarity, it goes back into this. It goes into one thing. And so they're working off of a polarity, and they're looking from the high side and being negative to the stable salt side, which is the Vili or the Ve, and that's your family side, which again, they're a very anti-family, where heathens were known for worshiping rather than having the worship as the gods as heavily. It was more of a worship of the family and your ancestors, and you were by honor required and obligated, again, as close. These are the 2 things that is close: being a host and living up to your family, living up to the greatness of your forefathers. You don't want to be less than them. That would be horrible. And how could you not be something that your kids are going to need to work up to and look up to? That this is a bad plan. And so this is the other thing that you did not do. Family was super important, and the gods, it was more of an alignment. And so, like I don't pray to Odin. If I'm about to do something impressive, that's one of the only times I call Odin. Hey, check this out. I'm about to do some shit. You might be impressed. And so this was the type of people he wanted. He didn't want beggars asking them to do his, come help me. Oh, come take care of my basic life. No, he wanted people that were strong, independent people that were like, no, don't come over here because you're trying to help me out for charity. Come look over here because you're going to be impressed. You're going to be proud. And so there's a path that he set forth in order to become who he was. And I try to follow that same said path. And so more, instead of a worshipful relationship, it's more of a relationship of a very sacred elder that accomplished things that I also wish to accomplish, and made himself into a being that I also wish to become and achieve.
I like that difference. Yeah, it's really, about becoming, worthy, that focus on honorable behavior, and that being the value, so that your value is associated with honorable acts, right? And being a responsible person, and being independent, and taking care of your commitments, being self-sufficient. It's really so far from where a lot of our modern culture seems to have gone.
Oh, they seem to moved over to a little better light. They seem to glorify into where if they can live and not take care of themselves and just live off of a system, whether it's somebody they're dating, whether it's the government, whether it's going to work and not putting in work. Like I can't even imagine, like, part of the reason that I have a hard time with some of the younger employees, they have this idea that you hiring them and they're hanging out is apparently like the deal. Like, no, dude, you're getting this many dollars an hour to produce work for an hour. And if you aren't working for that hour, why would I give you money for that hour? I'm not, you just hanging out here. And I don't even understand the mentality, because at the end of a shift, you're going to know I was there. Like, there's going to be no question what I did. And that's a fact. And there's going to be a very good exchange that happens because of this, that your company, because here's the other weird thing. Because if you, even as an employee, and I'm not an employee, but but as an employee, you got to understand that the company that you're working for has to make money also. You don't get to make all the money that they make. And then you're not paying the risks that they're paying. You're not paying the taxes that they're paying. You're not surviving the ups and downs that they're making sure you are eating. Because this is the thing that, and businesses do fail at this today, but this is the thing that they didn't understand, and where they started portraying these people as these landed gentry. Understand, as a good caretaker of the land, I know that the thralls, normal people, aren't good at taking care of themselves. They will make bad choices. They will eat like gluttons. They will use things up when they shouldn't be using them up. They will live by, in all kinds of ways that are not will not set them up for a good and stable future. It's just how people are. And so as a good leader, obviously, I'm going to make sure that, again, like I did with the calculation with the tomatoes, I know if I eat 4 jars a week and I have this many stocked up, I'm good for the entire year until I can harvest tomatoes again and start having fresh tomatoes, and I can start this cycle over again. And if you want to eat 6 jars of tomatoes and start eating them because you decided that you've put on some weight and you are capable of eating more, and you start getting a little gluttonous, well, now our calculation has changed entirely, because at 6 jars times 52 weeks is a little over 300 jars, not a little over 200 jars by the math. Well, that's 100 jars difference. Well, geez, that means that if you're eating them at that rate, I'm going to go a substantial amount of time with no spaghetti sauce. And now I got to buy spaghetti sauce, or nobody's going to get it, or else I'm going to have to ration it down. And now everybody's angry. And as I'm rationing it down, are you the one putting in work? Were you the one eating the extra spaghetti sauce? Because I don't really want to give it to you. And so all these things need to be mitigated by a good leader, who's going to make sure that every meal is a good benefit. Absolutely. He's going to have to fill his storehouses so that way in the bad times, that's what you're eating, buddy, is out of those storehouses. So you should definitely feel a vested interest into filling them. And that's not at all what kids have any interest in today. Is every bit of their labor is theirs, and you shouldn't make anything off of it. Like, well, then why do I have you here, bro? I don't understand. So you can make money? Like, I don't even like you. Your attitude's bad. You don't do good work, and I don't like hanging out with you. Get out of here. Where this, again, to just, even if I did not like my employer, for me to act in such a dishonorable way where I didn't keep up my end of the bargain, that's on me. My honor is on me. Which doesn't mean that I have to walk around. This is another weird variance where I don't understand. Like, if you're my enemy and we have got a problem, I don't need to act honorably toward you in any way. There's no need for it. We're enemies. Like, you aren't going to act honorably toward me. So that part of it is a weird Christian thing where they're like, you hold this high honor with your enemy, and you don't. Your enemy's going to lie, cheat, steal, stab you in the back, do whatever he can to get you out of the way. That's what enemies do. It's that whole scorpion is a scorpion thing. And a scorpion's not necessarily bad, but just know what it is. It's going to do this. It's going to act like that. That's what you should act accordingly yourself. And so, but when you're interacting with people that aren't your enemies, you absolutely need to carry yourself with honor, or else you're the bad person.
I just hear a strong sense of integrity and pride in self. These teachings that, of course, like our children need, but as opposed to like, woe is me, and I was born in original sin, and these kinds of things, so that's like the difference. And it really makes up the caliper of a good human, right?
Exactly.
That's what I hear. So I truly appreciate your very powerful personal journey in truth, and all the things that you went through to get to where you are today. And of course, we all have our own way of how we've navigated and how we've learned. But I guess I can appreciate you like going through the rabbinic studies and all these things. Like, I went through all those religions, was raised Jewish, and trying to learn all these things. My kids go to Christian school, right? Because they're learning Christianity. Yep. Everybody's like, what? Your kids go to Christian school? But they're learning it, and they're walking through the fire literally, and they get a lot of pressure because they don't necessarily subscribe, but they say things like, well, I'm here to learn about it. And so they come home and we talk about it. And so I appreciate you today very much, because it's given me another avenue to explore myself and then explore with them and others. So you coming on and talking about everything that you did today, it's not just for me and it's for everybody in this room, but it's going to go out to a whole bunch of other people, and what you're doing at festivals and going and speaking. And I encourage you, even though you don't need me to keep doing it.
I do appreciate it, though. Absolutely.
I know I missed some of it, but it's been just lovely listening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I would just add, for anybody who is listening, to understand that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter the details of how you're choosing to live, as long as it falls under the, general moral and ethical guidelines. You practice common courtesy in your everyday life. I'm a big advocate of practicing, which is really just what the Trinity is, what we were talking about earlier: thought, emotion, and action. And every single culture, belief system I've ever read about, it really is just another way for people who don't understand every part of the picture to describe the process of thought, emotion, and action.
Yeah.
And mythology has it, and modern day ideologies have it, but it all really comes, that's the backbone. And as long as people practice care, nonviolence, self-defense, these are really just the backbones, and everything else is details. And I encourage people to further study and look at everything, but to understand that there's a backbone, which is why I get along with everybody. Like, it doesn't matter to me. Like when I work with the community, it's usually like a knitting group or something. And I've got homeless people and wealthy people and Protestants and Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and Catholics and
All of them in there.
there's everybody. And, the majority of them all come down to the same conclusion. Excuse me, which is basically, yeah, practice care, show practice nonviolence and practice self-defensive force when necessary. And that's what it comes down to, really. So I wanted to know, Brittany, do you have any thoughts as well you wanted to share?
Okay, me, Brittany. No, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so tired. It's not you. I've been like going on like 4 hours of sleep, maybe. But I've just really enjoyed listening. Yeah, because of my family, I'm very curious about stuff like that. I still have to read the book called The Darkening Age. My honey recommended it to me, but it kind of talks, from what I have been told, it really gets into like the dark history surrounding like Christianity coming through and kind of like wiping out paganism. I know my last name Ashby is a hereditary last name, and so it's essentially like of the ash trees or caretakers of the ash trees. And so because of that, I've always kind of felt very connected with Yggdrasil. So I'm just enjoying kind of kicking back and receiving some information and a little bit different in some ways. And I'm just a nerd like that. So it's been nice because I've been working a lot. And so it's good to connect with you guys. I love hearing everything. And yeah, and I don't have a lot of sleepy proactive thoughts because I'm restful right now.
That's a good reference for a book we can add in there. So I'll try and find a link for that. And I would encourage people when reading a book like that to understand, like there's, I know because I lived in Ireland for many years, and in Ireland and the Scotlands and Old Britannia,
That's awesome.
you have you had what were called pagans, but really the pagans who were being called pagans in those regions, they called themselves Christians. And you have the Catholics, they practiced ancient Christianity, which is before Constantine muddied up the waters. And the people who were called pagans, they called themselves Christians. And then you had which were essentially the Romans who came in, and they were in the phase of changing from the Roman ideologies because it wasn't working for the mass people anymore. People weren't, buying it as they used to be. So they were, through history, you see a pattern of ideologies transferring,
does this match
Protestant
does this match at all the transition from empire to the more state where they had the more parliamentary? Is the time periods all, do you know?
And it's going from more Roman to Catholicism, which was helped a lot through the authorities, the state authorities. Turning, belief systems into a state business rather than a practice of life. And then they came in, and so like it's I think it's interesting. Okay. I think it's very interesting that, this is why I encourage everybody to go and look at everything, because you're going to get both sides of it. And then I think, because this is what I end up doing, is you end up piecing pieces together, be like, oh, okay, this is a far more clearer picture. And depending on who's writing the book, you're going to see the inconsistencies. And so this is why I encourage go and research and look into everything, because you're going to have the ancient, more of the ancient pagan histories written down through that. And then you're going to have more of the pagan Christian religion or histories written through that. But they're through the eyes of they're through the eyes of people who specialized in one thing or the other. And
Right.
not everybody always remembers to look through a wide scope. So I think that's important for people to remember too.
Yeah, good perspective. I really appreciated the term Germanic yearning. It's the first time I heard that, and I relate to that, especially over the last few years, really digging deeper into some of my own family history, and really recognizing I am like all Northern European. I'm every, Scandinavian and
Yeah.
Germanic, Dutch. I've uh, ancestors in Iceland, and of course England, Scotland, Ireland, very like sort of all of that. And my with that came a very also I think that most of my family who came to the United States originally were fleeing the Catholic Church and were part of the Protestant Reformation, but very disconnected from, I think, the pagan roots. Although, like when you were talking, Brittany, about that work ethic and
Oh
certain
yeah.
spirit, definitely, most definitely was that there. And my family were farmers and they owned land and they started businesses and they were, very, passing on land from family to, to their
That's
descendants,
awesome.
naming traditions and things like that. And but I think for me, I came into this world just in automatically pushing back Christian religion as it was presented to me, and really seeking like the truth underneath all of these religions, back
Yeah.
to the most organic sort of beginning of understanding of living on this planet and interacting with nature. And so this is really it feeds this need that I have to try to imagine and understand like what um our original relationship with life and each other and nature was. So
Yeah.
I appreciate helping me imagine that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And
Perfect
honestly,
example.
like I said, when I did bring up Christopher, that was one of my favorite parts of his book. He wrote Occult Germany, and he talks about that the German people just keep, it seems like they just keep going after something, and it's Christianity is not filling that void for them. And it's because, which I'm with Sarah. I'm not saying that any religion is better than another one, that they don't all contain the truths and things like that. But I do believe in epigenetics, and I believe epigenetically there's a specific reason that the German people keep going. They keep not finding answers in the spots that their ancestors weren't looking. Like, you need to maybe go back to where your ancestors were looking, and look at their kind of things, and then you wouldn't have this weird half where, like, even when you look at the biggest Christian holidays like Christmas, there's obviously nothing Christian about Christmas. Like, it's the time period doesn't match. If the baby's born in Israel, that time period's not winter for them. The why would you even have a baby then? Like, it doesn't make sense. It's the Santa Claus figure, that's obviously an Odin figure. The sleigh that he's riding, they literally call the Great Dipper Odin's, or the Dipper Odin's wain, which is Odin's wagon, as it swings around Polaris. And the whole reason it's going around the tree, we have Yggdrasil, and we have Yggdrasil, and the more that classic shape of pine tree, which they don't have in Israel, and so that shape, well, when he's going down, well, Christmas would happen at the height of the year, and after that, you have an extension of the daylight, and so after that, so I would state that it was at the winter solstice, and so this was, and then after that, your days get longer, and he starts going around, and it comes down in a wider loop. Um, and then you look at the reindeer. There's no reindeer in Israel. There just aren't. There never have been, ever. And the red and white motif is the Amanita muscaria mushroom. which the reindeer are eating themselves and then drinking their own urine in order to get high, because once their body processes it that second time, they really trip off it. So they pee in their mouth and just get lit up. And so these are some flying ass reindeer, right? And you're eating them too, so you're having a good time yourself. Like, and so
all I can do is go, ugh.
oh man, yeah, rough. I gotta tell you, last year at Flattoberfest, and one of them is a really close friend of mine, and they're in the, I call it the piss drinking cult. But there's a big Shivan Boo movement, and because I'm in a lot of alternative health talks and things, because I'm an alchemist and some of the products I make, and I am not down with that. And at the last one, two people started having this thing, and they're like talking about getting it straight out the tap and drinking it warm. I'm like, ugh. And
I backed off of the
I'm
crunchy
sitting on a
forum,
stage
and I got
between
into
people.
that too.
Yeah,
I
I'm
heard
like
about it, and I was like,
There's
couldn't
some
even
medicinal
bother.
purpose too. Yeah, urine can
It's
be
like,
a medicine.
well,
Some people
can't-
swear it's very healing, but I don't care.
yeah,
There's
I'm
my
sure.
German stubbornnness.
I also think that
there's
some societies have survived under really rough circumstances by
Yeah.
drinking urine too.
I believe it,
I'm
but
sure that there
I'm a
is.
Swedish princess living in America, and
Yeah.
I don't like to stay that way unless absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I wanted
Yeah.
to comment a little bit about the thing that in the Germanic people of Germanic descendancy there's a certain shame, right? Like you mentioned, Brittany, that post World War II shame.
Yeah.
And I think it was noticeable in my family. And there's also, but like you said, Ben, like people are out there searching for things everywhere, but their own ancestral roots, like the New Age communities out there looking at a lot of the Vedic stuff and the Native American stuff, but it seems to be everywhere. But like, how about your own blood, you know? And I think that must have to do with some of that shame and the cultural, almost like the masculine, you know, like shaming masculine men and a lot of that.
Yep.
Gotta
The
go
cultural
inward.
stigma. And like
Toxic masculinity.
like Brittany was explaining, I also grew up in a very Germanic area, and because I'm from South Dakota, and up in the upper Midwest, it was all just white people, and they separated according to their countries because it was very different cultures. And so, despite what you're told today, white people have no culture of their own. But if you come from an area like that, like specifically, there's certain things that the Polacks do. There's certain things that the Norwegians do. There's certain things that the Germans do. And they're very different. Like I'm not putting on no fucking, I'm sorry. I'm not putting no dang quilt on my barn out there. I'm not a Norwegian. Do I look Norwegian to you? I'm not, I'm not Oli and Lena. I'm not a Polak. Don't get me over here. Like we have our own very specific cultural things. Like as a German, like almost nobody knows what Kuchen is. And Kuchen is a classic German dessert, a custard pie with fruit in it. And oh yeah. You want to get me going on some Kuchen, I tell you what. And so we had our own cultures. We had our own very specific things. And that's all been lost because white people don't have culture. It's just white. And that's nonsense.
That's been what has been propagated in mostly like media and stuff, but really it's all regional. Like I grew up where, kind of in a gypsy fashion because just my mother moved around a lot. It wasn't for a specific reason, really. But I've lived all over the United States. I've lived in other countries, and really, people I think have always were operated in the same way where they can't separate themselves from their neighbor in a way where they can't accept the differences between them. And what I've learned is people are really all the same, and either you act like a dumb animal or you don't. And in different regions, you have slightly different traditions and cultural changes. And there's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions as well. Like one of the examples I tell people all the time, and they're just like, no, that's not true. I'm like, yeah, it is actually true. if you were to go like here in America, right? And the people here who are American and have a strong Irish background, they have a strong Irish culture. One of the things that's very distinct here with the Irish culture is corned beef hash.
Yeah.
And they're all about it, right? And everybody would tell you, they'd swear up and down that the Irish eat corned beef hash. And I'm like, okay. So I lived in Ireland, and I can tell you right now, not one of them. That is not a normal Irish thing. They don't know what corned beef hash is. I went to the butcher's. I had to explain it. I had to look it up online. He's like, that is absolutely not an Irish thing anywhere. I mean, and this is like an old school butcher in Ireland. I mean, the kind of Irish that can still speak Gaelic.
Oh wow.
So like
Gaelic.
he's been a butcher there for like this was just one of the butchers I talked to. So he had that brought in for me specifically. Because like I was like a community person, so people kind of knew me. So
Yeah.
and even in the cities in Ireland, there's like small towns. So like everybody's working together, and like everybody's kind of like homies that way. But
Yeah.
it was just a funny interaction. It was one of those things that's so stark that people just do not understand that culture doesn't necessarily have to do with this whole big religious attachment set up because you're white or black or you're from this religion or just because you live in this country or that or whatever. Sometimes it's really just based on the region and the particular traditions that develop based off of whatever situation was going on in that particular region's past. So the reason why American Irish people think that corned beef hash is such a staple in the general traditional Irish meal set is because when the Irish were immigrating to America, corned beef hash is a poor person's food.
Yep.
So that isn't
Like
everybody poor people's.
One Irish person make a really good roast, and now we associate corned beef hash with them.
That's it. That's all it takes is that kind
Make
of
a good poor man's meal.
Yep, that's it. That's all it takes for, like if you were to go to Ireland and get a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese, they think that is like American rich people gold. And I'm like,
what?
This is like dollar store, like I ain't got no money food. And they're charging people Kraft macaroni and cheese that I would spend $1 on here. They're charging
like Americans.
It's like 14 euros a box. And I'm like,
someone was telling me
I'm starting to sell.
Someone was telling me that in Japan, you know how anime is really big here? We have to tell this.
Yeah.
I don't. But, in Japan, they don't watch their own anime, but they think that American culture is Family Guy. So they watch popularly Family Guy. And stuff.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that terrible?
Wow. That is so sad, though.
I know.
I can't think of a worse representation of the American man.
Couldn't we be American Dad, not Family Guy?
Yeah.
I mean, that's something
I don't know, man.
Step up, maybe.
At least he's more impressive. I mean,
they're the same writers, Brittany. Like they're all the same writers, and
that's why I just came to that conclusion.
Yeah,
the artists and illustrators, they just look the same, so my brain labels them the same.
And all English people and Irish people, they all think Americans dress like a stereotypical Floridian man with like a Hawaiian shirt and like socks and
what?
I have 4 seasons where I live. We don't like
that's hilarious.
Yeah, and we're all like gun crazy.
Well,
every single one of us voted for Bush.
Right.
So
yeah.
it's these kind of things that people they forget that these details are just part of what humans do when we gossip about each other. And that's really
I like stereotypes. They're my favorite kind of jokes, or stereotypical jokes.
Oh,
I make fun of white people. I make fun of Asians. I make fun of everybody. No one's, safe for
No one's
That's
off
the
limits
problem
here.
with the world today. Lowbrow comedy is the only good comedy, and everybody wants to be all correct
Let's
and nice with
laugh
it.
at
Like,
our
then it's not
differences.
funny anymore.
Dark humor too sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pun
We have to make
intended.
fun of ourselves and this crazy situations that we're in life, right? It's sort of like these stories that you're telling about Odin and stuff. It's like this exaggerated, almost like they make themselves look kind of stupid, in some ways, but the lesson is what's important and the humor and
Yes.
right.
Oh
That
Yeah.
it's
God.
okay to loosen up and have a little fun and maybe
Mhm.
trash talk a little about your neighbor's mom
Yeah.
or whatever,
It
because
makes
it's
Not be
Exactly.
so
lighter things.
sensitive, right?
not be so sensitive. That's it. Like all the that's like one of the bigger things that, we see, like me and my husband, we see everybody's just triggered by everything. And it's like, dude,
Yeah.
we need to just like pull away all the cell phones and start giving our kids quarters so that they can make phone calls at a payphone or something and like
Yeah.
give them a
They don't
little bit.
exist anymore.
I know, like I feel like buying one for the house phone. Like in
And,
Ireland,
and then
even.
and then take all movies out of the movie stores except for Blazing Saddles or something of that nature, and tell everybody just quit being
Yes.
sensitive. Like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you watch Blazing Saddles like 5 or 6 times. You quit being sensitive about things. You're like, all right, I get
Because
it.
how is life? That's that, free will kind of fun element where you can't take everything so seriously because what ends up happening, and this is some I have to remind myself because like I can be a very hard line kind of person with certain things, and I get irritated when people don't do certain things like when people are just being blatantly rude because they feel like it's okay to just be obnoxious, but that's just like what they do all the time because they got like one reaction one time. Like I think that kind of stuff is just like that's not how you conduct yourself, so I can get a little bit annoyed with stuff like that. But I even have to remind myself, and I think we all do, that you need to be able to loosen up and take a joke and be like, okay, and all right, it's okay to crack a joke about something and not like
Yeah.
just have fun with like a group of people that you find are acceptable to you, like people you can be comfortable with. And every group is different, that's why we have so many movies with like the dynamics of like the circle of friends and they're all the same kind of people and they all function well together, but they're different from this group because
Yep.
that's just how that forms. So it's okay to like loosen up and not take things so seriously and remember that people really are just people. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the details are of whatever they believe in or want to feel comfortable with. The only thing that really matters is, are you a good person or are you a bad person? Are you going to violate rights or are you going to respect people's rights? These are the things that I find the most important with anybody that I come in contact with. So it's okay to it's okay to be friends with people who don't necessarily believe every single little detail you believe in, or even
So,
That would be
razz you
so
up a little
boring.
bit.
yeah, life
That would
would
be
be
so
boring,
boring.
right? Without
Yeah.
diversity. So let's just kind of start to close up and then anything else you want to share, any thing that you feel like you left out that's important for us to take away today or summarize?
I think just the summary of it is just that the basic heathen lifestyle is just a lifestyle of accountability, but it's also a lifestyle of symbiosis. So while you're accountable for yourself, you also have to fit in with other people. And that's part of why the host rights and the guest rights and the things like that are so important. That as you guys are saying, that being a decent person, again, the if somebody shows up at my door and needs food and water, it doesn't matter what they believe or who they are, what's going on. That's a person. They need food and water. They're going to die without it. Give it to them. Like that. It's pretty simple stuff. And so But in order to achieve that, we have to be willing to let go of the free pass, in my opinion, or accountability, and start being our own people. Because then when I choose that, it's I'm choosing to be a decent person. I'm choosing specifically to act in a specific manner. I'm not just some whim of fate or whim of the gods, or following Christ or whatever. This is me, Benjamin Balderson, saying I'm going to be this person, and then making that happen by living that out. And this is the basis of heathenism, and it's not going to be for everybody. And that's the other thing. So as Sarah was saying, it doesn't bother me that other people believe other things, and they're all good things, because you don't see people going around proselytizing Odinism. Like, have you heard of our or of the Allfather? We've got a lighthouse pamphlet. Like, it's not something that we do, and it's honestly not a lifestyle for everybody. I would say, in all honesty, that it's more of a rural person's lifestyle than in culture than a city person's, period. So definitely, I'm not saying that that's the end all beat all, but I do think that the more traditional aspects of it, compared to the world that we're living in now, we need to bring back the respect, the self-accountability, the responsibility, the caring about your future of the land and of your people. Because to me, I don't care about and I also have a problem with the red pill guys who are going around, and everything with them is about getting money and getting tail and things like that, with no accountability on that. To me, the height of a man is a husband. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean as in a marriage. I mean the husbandry of, I'm living on this land, I'm responsible and accountable, and this is going to be better land because I am here overseeing it. These animals on this land will have a better life and live and be healthier and better because I am overseeing it, because I make sure, because that's what a husband does. My wife lives a better life, and so did the people underneath me that are living on my farm, because I make the right choices. And when I don't, we all suffer. And so I best be that dude that's making the right choices, doing the right things, and living the life that I'm preaching. That's the one huge thing that you're going to find in historically different between Roman style, Christian style leadership and Germanic style leaderships. Germanic style leadership leads from the front, which is part of why when Leslie asked, I said, yes, you can absolutely achieve more of a position if you prove yourself to be that, because Germanic leadership was always from the front. That's the dude doing it the best. You should follow him.
And Leslie and Brittany, do you guys have any final thoughts on Ben's information or his history?
I think it's a really powerful template for everyone to consider, a way to live in a way that's, I think, oriented to, from my perspective, a very natural law way of living, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm just happy to have been present and been able to listen. So yeah, I'm glad to connect with you guys again for another month. The ladies, at least. Nice to meet you, Ben.
It's very nice to meet you. Flattoberfest has been awesome, and you guys have been excellent.
Thank you so much for, taking your time out and working through the technology and the storm and everything to be here with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on another episode of the Girls Club. And that was episode number 11. And stay tuned for next month, because that's 1 year, the Girls Club.
Right.
So stay tuned
Wow.
and see what we've got going on. And it's going to be another great guest that we're going to have on. And we'll see you next time, guys. Thank you. Bye.